class differences, for instance, were huge in separating, let's say, women from Sarajevo who have affluent, good jobs, who live affluent lives, who travel, go to Paris. And then you go only 20 kilometers further away and you encounter women who simply didn't go to school, and you ask them, well, why? Well, there was no road.
Balkans Calling. Voices from the region.
The Seafield podcast series from me, Iman, part of Seafield. Today we have gathered with valuable scholars from the Southeastern Europe to talk about the very region. Today we are diving into feminist perspectives from the Balkans and how gender, memory, protest, and activism are reshaping post-conflict societies. We are thrilled to have with us Professor Vjollca Krasniqi and Professor Danijela Majstorović, two powerful voices in feminist scholarship and post-conflict studies from this very region. So before we start officially with our podcast, I would want to thank you for participating in this podcast and for sharing your very valuable knowledge with us. And before we dive in, I would like for you to start or maybe introduce yourselves and tell us more about your research and what you do. So maybe we could start with you. And is it okay if I call you Vjollca?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we could start with you, Vjollca.
Thank you, Iman. I am a sociologist and a gender scholar, but also an activist. In my research, I focus on gender memory in relation to nation building, but collective memory, and also issues around transitional justice and how gender informs and shapes processes of transitional justice in Kosovo. Even though I look at in my research also Kosovo as part of the broader Southeastern Europe. Mm-hmm. In my teaching, I teach gender, I teach research methods, and also art, gender studies and art, and ethics. So I will briefly perhaps also refer to some of my research and also my teaching in relation to the theme of the podcast that we are here talking today.
Yes, very gladly, and we will go further with our questions. But the next is Professor Danijela Majstorović. Can I call you Danijela?
Absolutely.
So,
thank you, Iman. I just want to say good morning to our audiences, whoever is listening, and whenever this is going to be broadcast. I'm this year a visiting professor at the University of Regensburg, teaching a course for the first time called Feminist Epistemologies, Situating Knowledge in Context. And the idea of situating knowledge in a context has been with me for a long time. By training, I'm a linguist, I'm a critical discourse analyst. Those are my beginnings. I'm a full professor of English and Cultural Studies at the University of Banja, Luka, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also very much involved as a professor and as an activist as well in the region. I also did, and I occasionally teach media studies, cultural studies, and more recently, especially after my 2021 book, Peripheral Selves, Discourse and Affect in Post-Socialist Bosnia and Herzegovina, I've been kind of moving away from my, let's say, more formal training in CDA, critical discourse analysis, to affect studies. This has been heavily inspired by my most recent research on social movements and migrations happening in the Western Balkans. Now we're witnessing this huge third wave of migrations, and this is something that's been with me. And I've been a part of this movement, also having been a migrant, temporary migrant in Germany between 2018 and 2021, and also having participated in many social protests. It's a privilege and an honor to talk to you today, Iman, and I hope that we uncover some previously unknown stories and realms, and I'm sure Vjollca, who's a dear friend, and I will shed some of our feminist, non-hierarchical knowledge with your audiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I said, I'm very happy that you are both my guests today. So I would like to start with my first question to Vjollca. So in your research, you addressed the politics of representation in post-war Kosovo. Can you explain what that means and how are femininity and masculinity represented and why does it matter?
Politics of representation, I define as a frame to examine how political systems and cultural narratives shape understandings of gender and how they impact constructions of identities, especially femininity and masculinity. And I'm adopting this framework to explore, of course, power dynamics and how power dynamics construct gendered identities so that are always differentiated, how the hierarchies are being reproduced, maintained, and reconstructed, and also how they shape social norms and expectations of what it is what are the understandings of femininity and masculinity, what are also the expectations how men and women should organize their lives, should behave, should represent themselves also in the public realm. I think when we also work with the concept of representation more broadly and politics of representation, we also look at discourses and media representation, media portrayals, and how they contribute to the construction, reconstruction, but also reinforcement of specific gender identities, such as ideals of a woman, ideals of a man, also femininity and masculinity. So and in this power analysis also enable us to deconstruct this more deeply and to understand how certain ideals of femininity that are predominantly associated with the notion of passivity, so that femininity is symbolically assumed to have this, to be defined by having this passive element to it, and also that relates to the public domain and the field of reproduction, so that femininity is mostly associated with norms that are related to the private life, to the social, to reproduction, and also to nurturing, so that also in this realm it devoids femininity from this agency, especially that is related to the public sphere. While on the other side, masculinity is defined, is perceived mostly through it is given agency. It's perceived as having this potential, this assertiveness, and also this power that dominates across symbolic systems, but also more broadly in the domains of social, political, and economic life. And so in the politics of representations, all these elements, these features are very important to deconstruct this, how the hierarchies are being remade, reconstructed, how is the power shaping them, how in a way power relationships are also shifting and changing, and of course by applying a very situated knowledge and grounded in a very specific context in order to offer very historically informed analysis, because while gender power is of course a universal, but the base how power is being kind of deployed is temporal, but it's also historical. So it varies across time and across space, and it's also very dynamic. And for this, feminist also epistemologists or feminist theorists invite us to deconstruct this by a very historically informed approach that looks at different locales in terms to find what are the power dynamics at place that are temporal, that are shifting, that are also particular. The idea is how to make these pluralities and particularities visible in the knowledge that we produce through gender theories, and especially when we apply the concept or the framework of politics of representation.
Okay, that was a very nice and Yeah, very detailed answer. Thank you. And yeah, we talked about these representations you were talking about in Kosovo, but also in the general sphere. But also I would like to ask Danijela. She also had analysis of gender discourses in post-war Bosnia. So I would like to ask you, based on your research, you had works, for example, More Than Tolerance in 2011. And you did the gender analysis or the analysis of gender discourses in post-war Bosnia. What does feminist transformation look like in Bosnia and Herzegovina? And how are these transformations articulated in the media, education, institutions, in activism?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you have brought scholars from Kosovo and Bosnia together. I think we need to have more dialogue because we have very many similarities when it comes to these transformations you were talking about, the role of the international community, and of course everything else, all things post-Yugoslav that were very differently interpreted in different contexts. Which I don't want to get into right now because that would take us probably a couple of hours. So I'm really glad to be in conversation with Vjollca, and maybe we compare and contrast some of the perspectives. One thing that has shaped Bosnia, and I have to bring this up, although you haven't specifically asked me, is that we are in the year 2025, which marks the 30th anniversary of Dayton Peace Agreement. And this peace agreement has really shaped the post-socialist life and condition, if you will, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So as of 1995, there is no more war, but war has never been more present. And war is such a, I don't know whether to call it a situation, a condition. John Galton comes to mind, negative peace. This is what we've had in Bosnia so far. And we all know through research and many different studies that war and post-war era in Bosnia has meant repatriarchalisation and retraditionalisation of gender roles. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, while you had socialist modernity during Yugoslav times, where a lot of women got emancipated during the socialist period in the sense of their access to the university, media sphere, organized child rearing in kindergartens, etc., etc. After the 90s, the situation changed a lot for a lot of women. Another thing that happened that was a consequence of the post-war period was that women also became a lot more active. So I remember something that shaped me. I'm now 46 years old. I was 18 when the war finished. A lot of women from Bosnia and Herzegovina started working as translators. That meant, let's say, a bigger salary, and that meant emancipation for a lot of us who went out to work, whereas guys who were in the trenches didn't really feel like that. So I would say that for a lot of women in the late 90s in Bosnia, this access to international jobs, whether it's translation or organizational stuff, meant literally getting emancipated through your paycheck, in the sense that women were educated, using their English skills, flexibility and whatnot to get access to these jobs. Another thing that happened was, of course, with this, again, depending on whether you were in a rural or an urban area, of course there were differences. And I've done a study with my colleague Maja Mandić on what it means to be a Bosnian woman. Aside from these media analysis, I've done a lot of media analysis. And of course, I can summarize them and say that mostly women were, not only were they underrepresented or represented in the frames of, I'm like this perfect woman, I'm perfectly well-groomed, I have 3 children, and I have a PhD. Something that we also notice in Latin America, another transitional context. The women who were like in that study that you were referring to, who were talked about as persons, as individuals, were foreigners. I remember, for instance, media reporting on Carla Del Ponte. So for her, she almost like had this persona that there was never a Bosnian female politician of whom the media spoke so highly. Well, later on, it changed. Now we have people from Sabina Čudić to Željka Cvijanović, very different on the political spectrum in terms of the politicians. But these representations pretty much remain the same. There were, of course, some changes to it. You can't say that it's a monolithic situation, of course. But what we discovered with Mandić and I, what we discovered during this study, what it means a Bosnian woman, I think that study, it came out in a volume, Living with Patriarchy, which I edited with Inger Lassen back in 2011, was that patriarchy remains, whether you're a transitional country, whether you're a Western European country. So in a more subtle way, even in a Swedish bank, you will encounter patriarchy as much as you will in Kosovo or in Bosnia. I mean, those are different levels, or in Germany, you know. So that there are different nuances, different levels. I think I'm a cultural studies scholar. Vjollca is a sociologist. I think that the knowledge that we bring, the feminist-inspired knowledge of all these, let's say, traditional, more or less traditional disciplines, is the novelty precisely in that we are looking for these nuances. And I think the research has to be nuanced. You cannot be monolithic. You cannot, this is something that I discuss with my students as well. So what we discovered in Bosnia, I mean, going back to Gayatri Spivak and strategic essentialism, we have to have the category of a woman. But what we discovered in Bosnia was that there were the class differences, for instance, were huge in separating, let's say, women from Sarajevo who have affluent, good jobs, who live affluent lives, who travel, go to Paris, and then you go only 20 kilometers further away and you encounter women who simply didn't go to school, and you ask them, well, why? Well, there was no road leading from that village to the school. So you discover all these structural elements that were in fact crucial in banning or prohibiting access for women to get, let's say, better education. And for instance, to go back to my mother, who was born 1952, she was the first generation after World War II that had the stipend. She could go from a small town in Bosnia to Sarajevo to study law. So, okay, going back to these opportunities back in the 70s, for instance, and comparing them to now, you don't see that these temporalities that you were talking about were always linear. They're very disrupted. And I like to talk about these disruptions. This is something that's very important to me when discussing gender research and feminist theory, especially in the peripheries, because it is very different from those in the West.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and it's very good to have an insight from 30 or 40 years ago to now from Bosnia, but also in Kosovo. How did it look before and now? And where does Kosovo stand today in terms of gender equality in public and institutional discourse or public debates? Do you think things are changing?
Absolutely. And there is always change. There is always transformation. And I fully agree with Danijela. That's why this change is evolving, is transformation is taking place. Mm-hmm. We need to pay attention of what remains the constant. And the constant, similar to the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is that the patriarchy is the underlying structure.
Yes.
And it remains. Even though it's not as static, also the patriarchy, it is dynamic. It changes. It doesn't stay still in a way. But the underpinnings of the patriarchy as a system is very entrenched and ingrained. And you see that in many different domains, starting from politics, from economics, from education.
Yes.
Even higher education is not excluded because we see how disparities, also differentiated career paths, for example, for academics, women and men in the higher education. We see in the cultural representations, we see that patriarchy, how it works in the media, and of course we see in the private life and in the domain of the family. And I think a connecting thread in this, for example, not only with, for example, in the comparison with Bosnia with Kosovo, but also more broadly Southeastern Europe, is, for example, the issue of gender-based violence. And what the continuity is, for example, from pre-war, during pre-war, during war, and post-war, is that violence is a continuum. This gender-based violence continues, and it affects women in many different situations, depending on where women are situated within the broader social structure, because violence does not impact all women in equal ways. And here also importance of bringing intersectionality as a lens on how to look at what is changing, what are the gender norms, what are the roles, what are power dynamics shifting. I think we cannot have a full picture or a nuance, as Danijela said, nuanced research, nuanced knowledge, based if we do not also have the intersectionality lens. And this becomes very important, because to talk about gender is also to exclude this essentialist, also strategic essentialism, and to look at women that are more marginalized, more vulnerable, and here class, age, location, disability, any other acts of identity becomes crucial and becomes important. So in this way, it's very difficult to bring this generalized kind of view, whether there is a significant gender transformation that speaks about more egalitarianism or non-hierarchical restructuring of culture, of society, economy, and politics, and also of the private life. But it is in a way a dynamic and also a process that differs across social stratas. And of course, within our in our research, we aim to bring those who are at the margins. So we try to build this knowledge not from what is in the center, but bringing voices and women and different subjectivities that are sidelined, that are excluded, and that they are on the margins. So this idea is to think about also transformation of gender through shifting the attention, not and bringing the margins at the center, and to see this relational aspect of gender transformation by this relationship of center and periphery, and here of margins by adopting the intersectionality lens. But definitely there is not only in Kosovo but also more broadly in Southeastern Europe, there are laws on gender equality. There are constitutional provisions that guarantee human rights and also women's rights. There's an Istanbul Convention that has been ratified by all states in Southeastern Europe against gender-based violence. There are certain different institutional mechanisms that promote and gender policy, look at gender mainstreaming in the policy making. There are vibrant women's movements, and there is now a long history of women's movements in the region, but still there is a long way to go, because the constraints and challenges remain at large.
If I may just add to what Vjollca was saying, what was that famous banner that says, "If you rape one more girl, we're going to burn this town"? I think that was in Kosovo.
Yes.
Yeah. In Bosnia, there's been a surge recently of women's murders, usually by their partners, their husbands. So the politicians, especially in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, have started initiatives to introduce femicide as a separate criminal act. And I was talking to some of the politicians, most notably the person who was the president of the, I think, House of Parliaments in the Federation. He started this talk. They had a special session of the parliament in Sarajevo last year, and he started, they used to first express hatred, whatever, violence, and then they started killing them, meaning killing women, killing their wives. The most notable case of this woman, Nizama, that literally triggered this whole very nasty wave of murders. And not only are they killing them, they're recording the killings. It's like the snuff. I mean, imagine that level of hatred. And not only of hatred, because I've also listened to some of the parliamentary debates. I think that it's not enough, for instance, to have a safe house. The police need to be trained. There have to be measures, very strict measures, so that these perpetrators will, they would know that they would get punished with safe houses, for instance. I mean, I'm using this example of safe houses, Frauenhäuser, what's it called? Frauenhäuser. the perpetrator stays at home, the woman goes with the child to this house. So she's the one who's on the losing end.
Yeah.
For instance, that's been problematized a lot. And also gender violence is a topic. I was mentioning how in the 50s, women gained access in Bosnia to employment, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that Svetlana Slavčak and the late Vesna Kesic talk about, and that was actually on my Facebook wall a couple of years ago when I asked, what was it that brought more emancipation for women, socialism or feminism? And of course, we refer to the 1970 Drukca žena, proletarians who is washing your socks and everything. Even in socialism, which was for a lot of women, very emancipatory in terms of getting access to, usually it became a triple burden, double burden, whatnot. Family violence was a taboo in these societies. So that wasn't spoken about. Like even now, there's a stigma associated with divorce, with violence. You don't talk about these things because you're seen as, we have this saying in Bosnia, jadnica. You're like this miserable one. You don't want to be miserable. You want to be a powerful woman.
Yeah.
And when the entire system works against you, it's really difficult to be powerful. It's really difficult to assume, and also economic, independence is a huge factor in it. And for a lot of women in Bosnia, I'm sure in Kosovo, it's, they're not economically powerful enough. So the issue of divorce means I'm going to get cut off and I won't get any money. Mm-hmm. So it's a calculation based on, between a rock and a hard place, as they say. It's a very difficult choice, especially if you have children. So these are really difficult choices. And we as researchers, I think, need to make these choices more understandable for the wider public, both home and abroad, in order to see what is really happening. I just briefly wanted to add on.
That's very great that you added. And I would like to ask you maybe to add on the question, is there any legislation in Bosnia?
There is, again, in the Istanbul Convention. They're trying to bring this. I don't know how far they've gotten with it. To Republika Srpska, unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet. I think there need to be stronger initiatives. It's not going to fall into our lap. I think that anything like that needs to be fought for. But there has to be an understanding that if we let women die just because they're women, and usually it's not some unknown perpetrator. Usually it's somebody you live with, somebody you're close with, somebody, who you probably have children with. It's really difficult to get out of this situation, especially because we come from the peripheries. There are no jobs available. Women are poorer. That's a big factor. One thing that has kind of countered that, and I'm always trying to see, I'm glad Vjollca brought the issue of intersectionality. I think the intersectionality should be, there's been some criticism of intersectionality for being ornamental. But I think in our context, it's crucial for the understanding of how class, poverty, stuff like that is related to gender, how it's shaped. It's different, of course, if you are, again, urban, rural, rich, poor, whatnot. So one strategy for women, this is kind of similar to what I was talking about earlier when in 1996, a lot of women like me and older took up these jobs with international organizations, which kind of emancipated us. We started making this money. Another trend that's been going on, and I know that it's been going on in Kosovo and in other Western Balkans countries, is this trend of migration for women who are primarily in the care work sector because of this Westbalkanregelung, which was brought in 2015 in Germany to actually help and make it easier for men and women, but first it was women, of course, because there were more women who are in care work and medical sector, to come to Germany, learn the language and get these jobs, very secure jobs, relatively well paid. There are, of course, different arrangements. But I know in Bosnia, there's been this organization, Triple Win, for instance, which trained nurses, mostly women, in German and in certain other skills. This happened 10 years ago. So we are now witnessing literally this surge of women who again took things who empowered themselves and took their families, husbands and children once they settled in Germany during this, again, structural thing that Bundestag brought that made it possible for them to come to Germany to work. And again, through these salaries and new opportunities to emancipate themselves and to become stronger and to kind of reinvent, that also meant that people are leaving the Balkans, but that's another story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And as we are in this topic, so to say, yeah, femicide, and also let's go back to history. Vjollca, I know that you have been researching about slow memory. Could you maybe explain to us what it means and what it means in slow memory in Kosovo in this aspect? Yeah,
Absolutely. First, I would like to say that part of my research is memory, and I'm looking at gender and collective memory.
Yes.
Just briefly to make an introduction to the topic or the critique that collective memories are dominated by male forms of remembrance practices. Actors in the collective memory tend to be also very gender differentiated, and because this ties with the processes of how the nations are being imagined, how the nations are being reconstructed. So that in that process of imagination, women are excluded, or if they are not excluded, they are brought into these processes of collective memory through very predetermined tropes, narratives, and that reflect also how the women's positions and symbolic positions that they have within the nation, which are mostly mothers, sacrificing mothers, sacrificing sisters, or supporters of the national projects. So in this way, they are not agents as such, but they are intercalated. They are brought in the larger nation building processes. So that it's important to focus, to bring gender and of course intersectionality into analysis of how memory, what's being remembered, who is being remembered, what are the silences, what is not there, what is being forgotten, what are the causes, why, in what way, and how is this remembering and also forgetting evolves and takes place within this larger social frameworks where memory is taking place. And the body of knowledge on gender and memory is vast. And it's the feminist theories, gender scholars who have shown from many different contexts how collective memories and the processes of remembrance ignore women and ignore gender. So the slow memory as a framework, as a concept, is a new concept that tries to move to shift. Is a paradigm shift or an attempt towards a paradigm shift that conceptualizes practices of remembrance in a multi-sided, not related to one particular event, not particular historical date, even though that's very much the dominant of the traditional ideas about, or in the collective memory, that there are specific dates, actors that we remember. But rather than looking at the memory that is not related to events, that is, events are not particularly the focus of the research, even though the concept does not exclude events as important frames of remembrance, but moving away from the events, looking at them as multi-sided, and also looking at these processes of remembrance. How do societies remember? How do we remember in a different way that is not past, that is not only related to commemorations, and it's not only related to the politics of memory, and especially to forms of remembrance that are state-driven, but rather than to a memory that is of everyday life, that relates to the ordinary, and also that relates to social groups and individuals that are excluded from the mainstream and dominant narratives of remembrance. And by focusing not on what is being remembered, but how remembrance take place. So the focus is on the process, and also by looking at the past and its manifestations in the present, not looking at the past as a resource. So it's like we bring the past and look at many different possibilities, because there is a vast source that is in the past to address silences, or address the oblivion and forgetfulness of those individuals, groups, events that have been totally marginalized or have been sidelined by dominant memories. And in this, it's just to provide more insights into the frames also and processes that shape collective identities and historical narratives.
Yeah.
And that's so important. So that's this process of focusing on the process and slowing down. That means like more reflection, reflexivity, more paying attention to politics of emotions, paying attention to engagement with different groups and communities, and also bringing their voices as equal in this knowledge production about how memory takes place. So it's both temporal and it's also contextual, but it's also about relationships. So slow memory, the focus is on relationships and how we build relationships with different groups, with different individuals, and also how we make visible memories that are not visible. So, and also how we unsilence something that has been silenced for a long
Definitely.
time.
So could you give maybe us an, let's say in Kosovo, how is the situation now? How is the past remembered from this aspect? Are these points that you mentioned taken in account, or is it a bitter memory that lingers through our minds and we live it every day? Or is it something that we get to get used to it by speaking it, by not being silenced? How would you describe it?
This goes hand in hand with how history is being produced. What is history that is coming out, and especially the institutional history that overshadows any notion of public history. That every subject, every person is an actor of history, and through slow memory. And especially in the Kosovo context, it's important to bring this very personal, non-politicized memories, and especially of ordinary people. And here, my interest is, of course, on women, because women were triple or four times sidelined within the dominant narratives and remembrance. So I would say that it's how women tell about their stories, about their memories, and also other groups that have been totally marginalized by the dominant memory and historical narrative. So with this, I think we need so much work, so much research to build on a memory that brings women at the center and also other marginalized group, and especially that because when the dominant tropes are around centered on victimhood, but this victimhood is very politicized. Personal stories and personal histories of many people have been co-opted, have entered into this political narrative and political remembrance. But these ordinary people and their experiences have been totally just privatized or politicized. So we need to shift this. We need to bring more voices of ordinary people and ordinary women, and that they remember how they remember, also to collect their memories of everyday life with different transformations and shifts that they have witnessed, and also that they continue to live on with their impact on their everyday life.
Thank you.
Again, I would like to add, you brought up some my mind is constantly working to see what similarities we can. I think it's important that we are
I would like
in
also to
conversation.
ask you, about maybe to tell so you can tell us about maybe the risks or the consequences of this dominant political or post-war narratives, maybe in Bosnia in this case. What are the risks in this case when it comes to silencing women or reinforcing patriarchal norms to them? So could you say more about that?
I think the situation is, I mean, Vjollca is right, like when she talks about this institutional or kind of the official master commemorative narrations and how women are excluded from those processes. But there have been cases within the latest social movements in the region. And I mean here Serbia with Dijana Hrkalović, the mother of the child who died when the canopy toppled down in Novi Sad. So she became the face of the protest. The mother of the late David Dragičević, Suzana Radanović, who also appeared with his photos in front of the police unit, and that became such a powerful picture of a mother who wants truth for her child. And Maria, I cannot recollect the last name, in Greece. Also, the railroad accident had escalated into a serious protest. So what we are witnessing right now is the faces of women who would, let's say, normally be silenced and like hushed because they're wallowing in their own pain because their children died as a consequence of police corruption, bad infrastructure, irresponsibility, whatever, have become actually the beacons with whom a lot of people can identify. They've become the faces of the protest. Their grief turned into a very powerful message. So I think this whole victimhood narrative doesn't have to be like this. This is what feminist theory is teaching us. You know, we can shift those narratives, and women who suffered a lot. And let me tell you, when I was doing research with women from Bosnia, who are these care workers now in Germany or in Austria, whatever, one of the first things that they said was, I've done it because of my children. So transgenerational responsibility, I'm sure, you know, you have that in Kosovo too. We are patriarchal societies, but it also means, or maybe that's how it's interpreted in the context of Southeastern Europe, that means, that implies a strong relationship to your children, to your offspring. You're doing things for your children. Mm-hmm. So you will suffer, so your children wouldn't have to. So this is a common trope that I, for instance, encountered in interviewing many of my research participants, many of my interlocutors, this responsibility for your children, for their future, because they felt like in their homeland, you know, nobody took care of those children. And very often they say, I don't want my child to happen what happened to so-and-so. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, you have these very powerful female figures whose children died, which is like the worst thing in the Balkans. The worst thing that can happen to you is to lose your child if you are, of course, you have children. So this attachment is really something interesting for me to explore, and how, you know, coming from this position of vulnerability, you kind of rise to this heroic role, which is very empowering, you know, and it's empowering not only, you know, for the women who were actual agents of that change, but also for other women who are witnessing that or listening to that, who may even learn from that. And I think these examples stand out more than any institutional. Of course, we need institutions, we need laws, we need certain things to be recognized. But I think that in the realm of politics of affect, and how we feel emotionally and what these things bring to us, I think that women coming from Southeastern Europe have been very, and are, I admire their strength. I think they're very strong. It's just been these messages. There have been different messages other than those of vulnerability and victimhood. Mm-hmm. There have been messages of vulnerability and strong strength and power as well.
That's a very empowering point of view, because you take your vulnerability to a power, and I don't think there's a more stronger message than that. So we are coming to the closing of our podcast. So I would like to close it in a more positive note, like hopeful note. So this is a shared question for both of you. Looking ahead, what gives you hope when it comes to feminist futures in these post-conflict societies in Bosnia and in Kosovo, what does give you hope, or what you say, yeah, there is room for improvement, of course, but there is hope, and it's gonna get better, even if it's too optimistic point of view, but still we need optimism in our lives. And I would like to hear more about whatever you want.
It's really hard, you have to be a realist as well. And I've tried to be a realist when, especially with this concept of peripheral self, like if a peripheral self, let's say somebody coming from the Middle East or Bosnia as a migrant, whatever, imagine only what it means if you're an uneducated woman, like how peripheral on this scale you must be. But still, I mean, my research has shown that for a lot of women, especially those who were looking into different educational opportunities or job opportunities, what gave them strength was this sense of self-worth, the sense that they could make, for instance, with my students. I have a lot of students who understand the situation, and of course, they're future teachers, or future translators, scholars, whatever. Definitely the younger generations, but also the older generations who have the knowledge, who have the remnants of, this is a different story, but like I've also been very ill recently. I've gotten better. I've noticed how the healthcare system, for instance, stuff that kind of goes back to former Yugoslavia, educated some amazing, especially female doctors, who have, been the strongholds of the healthcare system. So I've seen, the middle generation, the younger generation, and of course there is hope. Of course there is hope. I mean, you can say, it's different. It's difficult coming from the peripheries. You very often have to leave your home, start anew. But I think that for women, it's important to make choices, to be able to make those choices and not have choices being made for them. And I think that's one of the most powerful and emancipatory things. To however difficult it is, of course, whatever your context is, to be able to make a choice that's good for you, that's not going to put you in a situation where you will get killed and nobody will be held responsible for it. So, yeah, I'd like to end on that note.
Wow. Okay. That's a very strong note. Thank you. Yeah, Vjollca?
Yeah, I would like to maintain this position that I think of, when I'm hopeful, of course, but I maintain some critical hope. But also two aspects where that makes me in this hope, of course, I'm looking, because hope is also aspirational. It's also looking forward. Also, hope is very active because it makes you also enact, be an active participant in life and in the broader public sphere. Two elements where I place my critical hope is one on education, because we see that the female student body, at least in most of the universities in Kosovo, is more than 50% of women enter education, higher education. So education is very, has an emancipatory potential, because that's also the highest point of any public and idea of what public is. And it's empowering. And we have seen this also, as Danijela has referred very rightly about across generations, that the role of education for women's empowerment. So I think this gives me so much hope, and I'm really hopeful, even though we need to be a guard on how education is being developed. Also, what are the study programs, and in what way gender studies are also situated within the higher education. And for this, also I'm advocating for more gender studies, for more at different levels, and also to integrate gender intersectionality across higher education, study programs, research agendas, etc. And the second point is this history and the presence of the women's movements. And also resistance, feminist organizing, feminist resistance is not a project that has an end, but it is a sine qua, it is a process, it is a momentum, it continues. So it's something that it will never be finished, because we are not thinking about any finitude of women's movements and feminist politics, but as a constant, being there in the public, asking difficult questions, speaking truth to power, bringing different lived realities of women, open in the policy realms, also on street protests and other forms of mobilization that lead towards empowerment. And as long as there is a vibrant feminist and women's movement and activism, I think this is a source of my critical hope, and this is also an invitation for each and every one to bring also the Pope as the title of or the call of bell hooks, that feminism is for all, to multiply feminist voices and also feminist claims for a more egalitarian, just, socially just present, and for the socially just future.
Let there be a never-ending, ongoing struggle, because without struggling, we're not going to make it. So definitely, these ongoing activities are at the core of, getting this strength that I'm talking about.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so we have come to the end of our podcast. We could talk, of course, these were very much condensed questions about very important topics from a feminist perspective. So I hope that our listeners have learned more perspectives from the region and have learned something new that I didn't know. And I am very happy that I had both professors here with me today, and would like to thank them again. And with this note, thank you for joining us on our podcast series. And until next time, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check the episode description. You'll always find our latest podcast recommendation there. See you next time.